I knew something was wrong the instant my tires ground over splintered wood instead of gravel. For a moment, my mind refused to accept it. The road still curved the same way it always had. The pine trees stood tall and unmoved, lining the ridge like silent guards. The wind carried that familiar mountain bite, cold, clean, sharp enough to sting your lungs. Everything felt exactly the same, except for the emptiness. Where my cabin should have stood, there was nothing. No roof, no walls, just a raw, flattened scar carved into the mountainside, as if someone had taken a blade to the land and scraped my life off it. I slammed the brakes and stumbled out of the truck, my heart pounding so violently I could hear it in my ears. I stood there, frozen, staring at the place where my home had been, my $5 million mountain retreat. Reduced to a field of broken beams, shattered stone, and crushed insulation spread out with a precision that made my stomach turn. This wasn't fire damage. This wasn't a storm. This wasn't vandalism. This was demolition. The evidence was everywhere once I forced myself to look. Support beams snapped inward instead of blown outward. Clean hydraulic bite marks carved into the wood. Nails sheared straight through, not bent, not torn cut. Whoever did this hadn't rushed. They hadn't panicked. They brought machines, time, and intent. They had come here to erase something. The only thing still standing was my mailbox. Hooked, leaning. The metal dented, the post slightly twisted but upright, like some kind of cruel monument. My last name barely clung to the rusted plate, hanging by one screw, rattling softly in the wind. I had been gone 3 days. 3 days. I stepped closer, my boots sinking into soil that was still damp and freshly turned. The smell hit me next. Diesel fuel, sawdust, hot metal lingering faintly in the cold air. That smell told me everything I needed to know. This hadn't happened weeks ago. It hadn't even happened days ago. Less than 48 hours. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow. Deliberate. Unhurried. Unhurried. Mr. Carter. I turned. Bethany Crowell stood at the edge of the clearing like she belonged there. Her hair was perfect. Her boots were spotless. A beige coat hung neatly from her shoulders, completely out of place among the mud, debris, and destruction. A clipboard rested against her arm like a badge of authority. She didn't look like someone responding to a disaster. She looked like someone inspecting a yard after a complaint. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," she said, her lips curling into something that almost resembled sympathy. But the HOA had no choice. My hands clenched before my thoughts caught up. "No choice," I repeated. She nodded and flipped a page on her clipboard. Multiple notices were sent. Violations were ignored. Fines went unpaid. According to our bylaws, the structure was deemed non-compliant and unsafe. Structure. The word landed harder than she realized. Not home, not residence. Structure. I walked past her without asking permission and knelt beside one of the broken support posts. The cut was smooth, too smooth, too smooth. Machine clean. I ran my thumb along the edge and felt the faint vibration marks left by heavy equipment. "You didn't condemn this," I said evenly. "You erased it." Bethany sighed like I was wasting her time. "Mr. Carter, Silver Ridge has standards. You can't just build whatever you want and disappear for weeks," the board voted. I stood and finally looked her straight in the eyes. "Show me the permit." Her smile faltered just for a fraction of a second. She handed me a stapled packet of papers. Official looking. Clean. At a glance, it might have fooled most people, but not me. The county seal was wrong, outdated by at least a decade. The formatting was off. The font spacing inconsistent, and the signature at the bottom was misspelled. Not forged carefully, forged quickly. There was no permit number, no contractor license, no county record reference. I flipped through the pages slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch between us. "This isn't enforcement," I said quietly. "This is fraud." Bethany stiffened. I don't appreciate that accusation. I don't appreciate my house being turned into mulch. Her jaw tightened. If you have concerns, you can file a request through the HOA portal. That's when I noticed the tracks. Fresh tire marks. Wide. Deep. Excavator width. They ran down the access road and stopped exactly where a new foundation would be poured. The realization hit me like ice water. They hadn't just destroyed my home. They'd already been preparing the land. I turned back to her slowly. Who was the contractor? She adjusted her grip on the clipboard. That information is internal. Who was the contractor? I repeated, softer this time. Her eyes flicked just briefly toward the tree line. And that told me everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten her. I didn't tell her who I was or what I did for a living. I simply said, "You picked the wrong ridge." An hour later, I sat across from Sheriff Morales in his office, photographs spread across his desk. He listened without interrupting as I explained the cut patterns, the soil disturbance, the forged paperwork. When I finished, he leaned back slowly. "They told us the property was abandoned," he said. "Uninhabitable. Claimed emergency authority." He slid a form toward me. The inspection signature belonged to a man who had retired 6 years earlier. I exhaled slowly. "So they lied to you too?" Morales nodded once. "Yeah. And that makes this criminal." I hesitated, then said the part I hadn't planned to reveal yet. "My cabin sits on state-protected land." He froze. "And I'm the Wyoming State Land Commissioner." The room went silent. Morales stood up, closed the door, and locked it. "You realize what this means," he said. "I do," I replied. "Which is why you need to understand this wasn't a mistake. This was coordinated." He looked down at the photos again, his jaw tightening. "There's a closed HOA meeting tonight," he said. "Pool house. Private." For the first time since I'd arrived, I smiled. Not anymore. And before we get into what happened next, before the doors were forced open, before the lies unraveled, before the people behind this realized they had demolished the wrong man's home. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The pool house lights were already on when I pulled into Silver Ridge, glowing warm and innocent against the dark slope of the mountain. From a distance, it looked peaceful, almost charming. That was the lie this place had perfected. I parked slowly and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Inside that building, the same people who smiled at block parties and complained about fence heights had just signed off on the destruction of my home. And they were about to do it again, to someone else, if nobody stopped them. I stepped out of the truck, folder tucked under my arm, phone already recording. The first thing I noticed was how quickly Bethany Crowell moved when she saw me through the glass. Chairs scraped. Voices hushed. Someone reached for the door like they might lock it. They didn't get the chance. I pushed inside, and the room went dead silent. About 20 residents sat in folding chairs, most of them older, bundled in jackets, looking confused more than hostile. At the front was the board, Bethany at the center, Todd the treasurer to her right, Cheryl the secretary clutching a notepad like a life raft. And standing near the back wall, arms crossed, watching everything with clinical calm, was a man I didn't recognize. Marcus Hale. He didn't look like an HOA volunteer. No nervous energy. No forced friendliness. He wore a dark jacket, expensive boots, and the expression of someone used to rooms bending around him. Bethany recovered first. "This is a closed meeting," she snapped. "You're not authorized to be here." I set my folder on the nearest table. "Judge Ellison disagrees." I slid the emergency court order across the surface. Bethany didn't touch it at first. She just stared, lips pressed tight, reading the header without needing to open it. Public access, judicial oversight, financial and land use matters only. Residents began whispering. Phones came out. Someone in the back started recording openly. Todd cleared his throat. Bethany, maybe we should. No, she cut in. This is intimidation. I finally spoke, voice steady, loud enough to carry. What's intimidating is tearing down a man's home while he's out of town and calling it compliance. That did it. The room erupted, questions, murmurs, anger bubbling just under the surface. Bethany raised her hands like a conductor trying to regain control. Everyone calm down. This is being handled. I turned to the residents. You were told this was enforcement. You were told this was legal. You were lied to. Marcus shifted slightly. Not nervous alert. I walked to the front and laid out the photographs. Close-ups of forged permits. The wrong county seal. The retired inspector's signature. The excavator tracks. This wasn't a violation response, I said. This was a demolition order disguised as HOA authority. Cheryl's pen shook in her hand. Bethany, is this true? Bethany's eyes flicked, not to me, but to Marcus. That was the moment. That single glance told me she wasn't the architect. She was the mouthpiece. Name the contractor, I said calmly. Bethany inhaled sharply. We don't have to disclose that. You do, I replied. Especially when the funds came from HOA reserves. Todd went pale. Wait, what funds? I turned to him. You signed the disbursement. His mouth opened, then closed. I just signed what's approved. Approved by who? Silence. Marcus finally spoke. His voice was smooth, practiced. Let's all take a breath. This is clearly an emotional situation. I looked at him for the first time. And you are? Consultant, he said, brought in to advise on community development. Development, I repeated. Interesting word. Bethany slammed her clipboard down. Enough. This meeting is adjourned. No, I said. It's just beginning. The door opened then. Sheriff Morales stepped inside, followed by 2 deputies. Every face in the room turned. Morales nodded to me once, then addressed the board. This meeting is now subject to an active criminal investigation. No one leaves. Bethany's composure shattered. This is outrageous. You can't. I can, Morales said, because you submitted falsified documents to my office. That landed hard. Phones were fully out now. Residents stood. Someone whispered, they lied to the sheriff? Morales continued, we also have reason to believe HOA funds were misused and laundered through a third party. Todd's chair scraped loudly as he stood halfway, then sat back down, hands trembling. Marcus's jaw tightened for the first time. The meeting dissolved into chaos, questions flying, voices raised, fear bleeding into anger. Through it all, Bethany kept trying to regain control, but it was gone. The authority she'd worn like armor cracked under the weight of truth. Morales leaned toward me. We've secured the site. Investigators are heading up to your property now. Good, I said. They'll want to look under the rubble. Less than an hour later, floodlights cut through the darkness at what used to be my cabin. Inspector Darnell moved through the debris with slow precision, treating every beam like evidence. He crouched near a blackened section of wood and frowned. That's not normal. He scraped a sample into a sealed bag. Industrial solvent. Strong stuff. Not something you buy at a hardware store. So they tried to burn it first, I said. He nodded. Looks like it. Then brought in heavy equipment to finish the job. A deputy called out from the far end. Sir, you need to see this. We walked to a cleared rectangular section of ground. Too clean. Too measured. Foundation prep, Darnell said quietly. They weren't just demolishing, they were planning to build. That's when the story snapped into focus. This wasn't about decor guidelines. This wasn't about fines. This was about land. Back at the HOA office, warrants were already being drafted. Special Investigator Sarah Whitfield from the Attorney General's office arrived before midnight, laptop under her arm, eyes sharp. She took one look at the forged permits and said, "This goes higher." By dawn, she had cracked into the HOA server. There's a shadow folder, she said, encrypted. Too advanced for retirees. She played the first audio file. Bethany's voice filled the room. The ridge needs to be cleared before the vote. The cabin has to go. Another voice, Marcus's, cool and instructive, call it a structure. People don't fight over structures. Then a third name surfaced in the documents. Byron Kepler, managing director. Denver-based, linked to a developer called Highline Ridge Holdings. Sarah looked at me. They were trying to seize the ridge. I nodded slowly. And they thought I wouldn't come back in time. Outside, the sun rose over Silver Ridge, lighting up the scar where my home had stood. They thought demolition would erase me. Instead, it exposed everything. By the time the sun fully cleared the ridge, Silver Ridge wasn't a neighborhood anymore. It was a crime scene. Yellow tape cut across the HOA office doors. State vehicles lined the gravel lot. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering, watching deputies carry out boxes of files like they were removing termites from a rotting house. Bethany Crowell hadn't slept. I could see it in her face when they brought her back for questioning. The polished confidence was gone. Her makeup was smudged, her posture stiff, like she was holding herself together by sheer denial. Marcus Hale, on the other hand, looked rested. That unsettled me more than anything else. He sat calmly in a chair outside the interview room, scrolling through his phone like he was waiting for a delayed flight. No handcuffs, no raised voice. Just quiet calculation. Special Investigator Sarah Whitfield leaned toward me. "That's the dangerous one," she said under her breath. "People like him don't panic unless the trap is airtight." I nodded. "Then let's tighten it." Inside the HOA office, forensic accountants went to work. Todd, the treasurer, was brought in next. He lasted less than 20 minutes. "I didn't know," he kept saying, voice cracking. "I swear I didn't know." Sarah slid a stack of papers across the table. "You signed 7 transfers totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. They told me it was landscaping, grading, emergency compliance work. Paid to a Nevada corporation formed 2 months ago," she asked. Todd's shoulders collapsed. Bethany said it was standard. Marcus said it was clean. That name again. Horizon Canyon Services was the shell. Nevada filing. No employees. No physical office. Dissolved less than a week after the demolition. Money in, money out. Gone. And every transfer had Todd's signature. Cheryl was next. She shook so badly she couldn't hold her coffee. "I kept minutes," she whispered. "I just wrote what they told me to write." Sarah softened slightly. "Then help us. What meetings weren't recorded?" Cheryl swallowed. "The ones with Marcus. The advisory sessions." She pulled out her phone and handed it over. "Audio recordings, not official minutes. Not summaries. Raw conversations." Bethany's voice again, sharper this time. "The investor won't wait forever." Marcus responding, calm as a surgeon. "The land has to be uncontested. Structures complicate acquisition." Bethany, "What if he fights?" Marcus, "He won't. People like him always assume rules protect them." I felt something cold settle in my chest. They hadn't just planned demolition. They'd planned on me being passive. By midday, Sarah had looped in federal contacts. Interstate wire transfers, coordinated fraud, use of forged government documents, destruction of property on state-protected land. "This is no longer just an HOA abuse case," she said. "This is organized financial crime." Outside, I watched Marcus finally lose patience. He stood and approached me, stopping just close enough to feel deliberate. "You know," he said quietly, "this didn't have to turn out like this." I met his gaze. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing," he smiled thinly. "Land like that doesn't come up often. Views like yours? Investors pay fortunes. And they demolish homes to get it?" He shrugged. "Progress is messy." "That's not progress," I said. "That's theft." His eyes hardened for a fraction of a second. "You could still come out ahead." There was. The offer. I already have, I replied. You just don't realize it yet. That was when the agents came for his phone. Marcus protested politely, but when they mentioned warrants, his smile vanished. The device disappeared into an evidence bag. Across town, something else was happening. Deputies executed a search at a temporary office space rented under Highline Ridge Holdings. Inside, they found printed maps of the ridge. Highlighted parcels. My parcel circled in red. One note stood out, scrawled in the margin. Carter absence confirmed. Timeline attached. They'd tracked my travel. They'd waited. That night, the news broke. Not the full story, but enough. State Land Commissioner's home, illegally demolished in HOA scheme. Phones lit up. Messages poured in. Old neighbors I barely knew thanked me. Others admitted they'd been threatened with fines they couldn't afford. Some had been pressured to sell. Silver Ridge hadn't been governed. It had been harvested. By morning, Bethany was no longer defiant. She sat hunched in the interview room, eyes red, voice thin. They promised it would be legal, she said. They said no one would get hurt. Sarah leaned forward. Someone lost their home. Bethany looked at me then. I didn't know who you were. That's the point, I replied. You didn't care. She broke. Names spilled out. Meetings. Promises of profit. A percentage of future sales if she cleared resistance. Emails she'd deleted. Accounts she didn't think anyone would trace. And at the center of it all, Byron Kepler. The architect. Denver money. National reach. A man who never appeared on HOA paperwork, but approved every move from behind the curtain. By the third day, arrest warrants were signed. Bethany first. Then Todd. Marcus was escorted out last. He didn't resist, didn't shout, just adjusted his jacket and looked at me as they cuffed him. This ridge will be developed eventually, he said. You can't stop that forever. I watched the door close behind him. Maybe not, I said softly. But you won't be part of it. That afternoon, I returned to the rubble. The investigators were done. The machines were gone. Just silence, wind moving through broken stone. A young boy from the neighborhood approached hesitantly. He held a folded piece of paper. My dad said to give you this, he said. It was a drawing. The ridge. The trees. A cabin standing tall again. I crouched to his level. Thank you, he smiled. We don't like bullies here anymore. I stood alone after he left, staring at the land they thought they could steal. They'd demolished my house, but they'd exposed their entire operation. And the biggest name hadn't even been touched yet. The kind of quiet that only comes after something violent has already happened and the shock hasn't worn off yet. Snow had started to fall lightly, dusting the flattened ground where my cabin once stood, softening the sharp edges of destruction like nature was trying to cover up a crime scene. Kepler arrived just after noon, black SUV, out-of-state plates, expensive coat. No cuffs. Yet. He stepped out like a man who expected to be greeted, not arrested, scanning the area with mild irritation as if this were a business inconvenience instead of the collapse of a criminal operation. He spotted me almost immediately. You're Carter, he said, walking over with his hand extended. Byron Kepler. I didn't take his hand. He smiled anyway. Unfortunate misunderstanding, this whole thing. That's a strange way to describe a felony, I replied. His eyes flicked briefly toward the agents behind me. You know how these things go. Overzealous locals? Paperwork mistakes. I nodded slowly. You authorized demolition on state-protected land using forged documents, shell corporations, and laundered funds. His smile thinned. Allegations. Sarah Whitfield stepped forward then, holding a tablet. Wire transfers don't allege, Mr. Stone allege. Kepler. They testify. She showed him the screen. The transfers. The contracts. His signature digital but unmistakable, authorizing the acquisition contingent on structure removal. For the first time, Kepler's confidence cracked. "You can't pin this on me," he said sharply. "I wasn't there. I didn't operate machinery." "You orchestrated it," Sarah replied. "And that's worse." Agents moved in. Kepler straightened his coat, trying one last angle. "This doesn't have to go nuclear. I have partners. Influence. This project brings revenue." I finally spoke again. "You demolished a man's home because it was inconvenient." The cuffs clicked shut. That sound echoed louder than the excavators ever had. The charges came fast after that. Federal fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud, destruction of property on protected land, denial of bail due to flight risk. His accounts frozen before the sunset. Marcus took a plea deal 2 weeks later. 15 years recommended pending cooperation. Bethany lost everything: position, reputation, freedom. Todd received a reduced sentence for testifying, barred permanently from financial oversight. Cheryl walked with probation and mandatory testimony, her cooperation sealing the case. And Silver Ridge HOA dissolved. Immediately, all fines voided. Lands erased. Records opened. A state-appointed administrator took over to unwind the damage. Refund checks mailed out to residents who'd been bled dry under the guise of community standards. The Ridge breathed again. The rebuild didn't start with contractors. It started with neighbors. Tom Bennett, a retired carpenter with hands like tree roots, showed up one morning with a truck full of tools and no questions. Others followed. Lumber, nails, coffee, quiet determination. No bylaws, no permits waved like weapons. Just people. We rebuilt smaller, stronger, simpler. A home that belonged to the Ridge instead of dominating it. One afternoon, the same young boy came back. He pinned his drawing above my workbench. The rebuilt cabin, the trees, the sun rising behind it. "This is how it's supposed to look," he said. He was right. Months later, new legislation passed quietly. Mandatory HOA audits, transparency requirements, a state ombudsman with real authority. The kind of changes that don't make headlines but stop the next Bethany before she starts. On the day the last board record was boxed up and removed, I stood on the porch of the new cabin and looked out across the valley. They thought demolition would silence me. They thought paperwork could erase a man. They were wrong. A home isn't just wood and stone. It's dignity, memory, belonging. And anyone who tries to steal that with lies and clipboards will eventually face something stronger than bylaws: the truth. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?